Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 1. This is probably, in my estimation, which does not count for much, the most difficult passage that has been interpreted in so many different ways, but always coming down to the same truth. And the same truth is this, that our God is glorious. Our God is glorious. And so I'm not going to be able to find all the symbolism in all that you see here in this book of Ezekiel, but to give you an idea of the difficulty of this specific chapter in the Judaistic tradition, the young rabbis would refuse to allow the young men to read the first chapter and the 47th chapter of Ezekiel until they were at the age of 30, because they were afraid that they might become discouraged by their inability to understand this text. So I'm going to Ezekiel chapter 1 specifically because I'm doing a short series on that I'm titling, Behold Your God on a Throne. Behold your God on a throne. And our first throne we looked at was Isaiah's vision of God in Isaiah chapter 6. It was last Wednesday. Tonight I will be doing Ezekiel chapter 1, and then the following 2 weeks will be Revelation 4 and Revelation 5, and then we'll go to the great white throne of the Revelation, and then we'll close out the series with the bema seat or the judgment throne of God found in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. So that's where we're going, and today is our second portion of this series or mini-series of messages, and I've entitled tonight's message, Glory on Display. Glory on Display. Our writer is Ezekiel, and let's hear what he has to say, and we just hear it from his mouth, that which he saw in chapter 1. In the 13th year, in the 4th month, and on the 5th day of the month, I was among the exiles by the Chebar channel, and the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the Chebar canal, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there. Ezekiel now says, as I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it and fire flashing forth continually. In the midst of the fire, it was as if it were gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces. Each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot. They sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. And the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of the lion on the right side, and 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an angel. The face of an eagle. Such were the faces, and their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. Each went straight forward. Whenever the Spirit would go, they went without turning as they went. And as for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and out of the fire went forth lightning. The living creatures darted to and fro like the appearance of flashing of lightning. Now, as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the four of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and the four had the same likeness. Their appearance and construction being as if it were a wheel within a wheel. When they went in any of their four directions without turning as they went. And their rooms were tall and handsome. The rooms of all four were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them, and when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Whenever the Spirit wanted to go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When those went, these went, and when those stood, these stood, and when those rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Over the heads of the living creatures, and there was the likeness of an expanse, shining like awe-inspiring crystal, spread out above their heads. And under the expanse, their wings were stretched out straight, one toward another, and each creature had two wings covering his body. When they went, I heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. When they stood still, they let down their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads. When they stood still, they let down their wings. And above the expanse over their heads, there was a likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness of a human appearance. And upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire, enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw it were the appearance of fire. And there was brightness around him, like the appearance of a bow that is in the clouds on the day of rain. And so was the appearance of the brightness all around. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. Well, that's a long passage, isn't it? Confused? Good, go home now. Just kidding. As I say, it's a very difficult passage for us to meditate upon. For those that are taking notes, I'm going to do this very, very quickly for you. I want to break down the chapter in its structure. And you can just write down these little headings by way of introduction. This is the structure of this specific chapter. Firstly, from verses 1 through 3, there we see the heavenly vision of Ezekiel. It is there that he looks and he sees the storm coming in. He sees the fire coming in. He hears the sounds coming. And we see this heavenly vision of Ezekiel. In verse 4, we see this blazing fire and an appearing of the awesomeness of the power of God. Verse number 5, we see 4 living creatures. And that runs all the way down from verse 5 down to verse 14. There are these 4 living creatures. When we go to Ezekiel chapter 10, we're going to find that they are cherubim. They are identified as cherubim. Remember, Isaiah were identified as seraphim, the burning ones. These ones are identified as cherubim, an order of angelic beings. These 4 living beings. In fact, we're going to see them again when we get to the throne in the Revelation. Specifically in Revelation chapter 5, we'll see them again. Then, after these 4 living creatures, we have four wheels. Four wheels. This is from verse 15 through 21, the four wheels. And then from verse 22 to verse 28, you'll find this vast, sparkling expanse, the throne of God, and God upon it speaking. So this is how it's very easily broken up into sections. I draw your attention first and foremost to the understanding of what's taken place and where they are as this man introduces us to the scene. So here's the first point, the scene. What is the scene that is at hand right here? Well, in verse 1 it says that it's in the 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, Ezekiel says, as I was among, here's the key, the exiles by the Kabar Canal. And the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God on the 5th day of the month. It was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the Kabar Canal, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there. So here is the scene. The first portion of the scene is where we're understanding that God is a God who is showing himself here to be glorious. But glorious in a way that when you just read this passage, you would say, what does that have to do with the glory of God? Well, it has everything to do with the glory of God, because God is revealing himself here at a time in which his people are in exile. Now, you remember the Babylonian exile. The first wave of the exile included men like Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. And then you're going to find the second wave, which included King Jehoiachin, Ezekiel, and 10,000 others. And so it's not a time of rejoicing for the nation. It's not even a time like Isaiah when they're in their land, but it is a time when they are removed from their land because of the glory of the judgment of God upon them. God has shown himself to these people to be faithful in judgment. In other words, what God says, this he will do. And that is a glorious truth about God. That God does not change. That God always lives up to his word. Now, he had warned them back in the book of Jeremiah that this was going to take place. That if they were not going to follow the Lord, if they were going to continue in their idolatry, that he would send in a king, and this king that he would send from the north would come and take them. And in fact, that king would end up destroying Jerusalem and destroying the temple. Now we understand in this specific wave of the exile, Jerusalem has not yet been destroyed. The temple has not been destroyed, but King Nebuchadnezzar has marched in and he has taken them captive and he has taken them away from Jerusalem, taken them away from the temple. This is a huge thing for them as they understand that God's presence was in the tabernacle where the altar, where the Ark of the Covenant was. Then the temple is built, and this is where God is coming down upon the Holy of Holies, and this is where God resides with his people. This is Jerusalem, the place where God is, and God shows himself to be glorious in taking them out, just like he promised that he would do. He warned them over and over and over again. If you go down this way, you're going to be judged. And the judgment is going to be consequences. I'm going to bring a king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, and he is going to judge you. So when you see Ezekiel at this, on the shore of the Kabar Canal in Babylon, it is experiencing something called the faithful judgment of God. And I lay that before you as something that I think many commentators don't even mention when speaking about the character of God in this passage. They speak about the consequences, they speak about the circumstance and the situation, but I think the underlying thought here has more to do with God's faithfulness in judgment. That they were warned, and God brought a circumstance upon them, just like He said. My note is this: He will do what He says. And that's a blessing for every believer, to know that God will do just as He says. Secondly, it not only shows God's faithfulness in judgment, but also it shows God's immunity to circumstances. It shows God's immunity to circumstances. Can you begin to think for a moment? Here this nation is away from their home. They have been judged. They are in an area where they are no longer honored. They feel like not only are they hopeless, but they are now godless because they're nowhere near their God. Their circumstance is a dire circumstance. And who shows up? God shows up. Immune to their circumstance. Not in crisis because of their circumstance. God shows up in the most dire of circumstances. And He is going to do something amazing, as we will see in a moment. For Anton, the encouragement is this: that even when I face circumstances that might seem to be off the chain, kind of, what am I going to do here? That God is immune to that. He is not held captive to my circumstances, regardless of how dire it might look. Have you ever found yourself in dire circumstances and wondered, God, where are you? We're without hope. I'm sure Ezekiel, at this time of his calling, he's 30 years old. He's now coming to the age where he can legally become a priest, but there's no temple to be a priest in. And God shows up. In a time when His people are hopeless, in a time when the false prophets are saying, don't worry about it, man. This is just a short period of time. We're going back. And they're lying. Because God had already said, for 70 years you will be there. Go ahead and make your home here and perpetuate the line. And here God shows up, and He shows that He is not captive to their circumstance. Not only is there the immunity of God to circumstance, but there is the initiating work with regards to this relationship. Look at this. Verse 2. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel. This is God initiating this interaction that's about to take place. I would remind us all that God, our God, is an initiating God. And here He initiates a relationship with Ezekiel that Ezekiel has never begun to even imagine could happen. A man at the age of 30, only now coming to the point where he's able to truly be a priest in the house of God. He's got nowhere to go. He's away from the temple. But still, God, in His grace and in His mercy, in a time of difficult circumstance, initiates a purposeful relationship with this man by the name of Ezekiel. And God initiates. Well, why is that even an encouragement to me? Because in this you see the condescending work of God. He doesn't have to meet with Ezekiel. He doesn't have to meet with His people. He's condescending from heaven above to meet with these people who are hopeless. These people who have become disobedient. These people who have become an adulterous nation. And God condescends to them and initiates a special relationship with Ezekiel. A purposeful relationship. Not just a relationship so that Ezekiel can say, God's my buddy, I'm God's friend, and all. No. It is very purposeful. God shows up in all His glory And he's going to knock Ezekiel down to his knees when Ezekiel realizes that this God of creation, this God who sustains all things, has condescended down to him and initiated a relationship with him, and that this God wants to use him as a mouthpiece. That's an amazing thought. It might not excite you tonight to think of that, but it does me, because I'm thankful that he first loved us, that he is the initiating God. Secondly, or fourthly, in the scene, I can see God's intimacy in relationship. Look at this passage goes on. Verse 3 says, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the Chebar Canal, and the hand of the Lord was upon him. The hand of the Lord was upon him. Well, what do you mean by that? I mean, is that like a physical hand? No, I don't believe it's a physical hand. It just has the idea of more than just God appearing in general, but his hand is upon this man. It speaks of a deep intimacy. You think for a moment, this God that all creation flees from, this God that is magnificent beyond your imagination, wants to have an intimate relationship with Ezekiel. There's this intimacy. You see God initiating, God having intimacy with Ezekiel. And then God's inhabitants, just because I was looking for an I word, God's inhabitants. The hand of the Lord was upon him. Here's the word, there. The hand of the Lord was upon him there. Well, where is the there? That's a great question to ask. The there is right there at the Chebar Canal in Babylon, outside of Jerusalem, away from the temple. And there, at that point, God shows up and has his hand upon this man, going to communicate with this man. As God's initiated this, he's shown himself to be immune to the circumstance, and he is intimately involved with him, and he decides this will be his inhabitants. His presence is the word that I wanted to use. His presence. I don't want to make light of it, but I am thinking if I was Ezekiel, I would want to say, what are you doing here? We're away from Jerusalem. We're away from the temple. We've been removed from your presence. What you doing here? You see, what God's showing here is that he is able to be and where he chooses. That he is not limited to a temple or the Holy of Holies or to a place in Jerusalem, but that he is at all places, at all times, but he manifests his presence where he wants, when he wants, and how he wants. So there's this inhabitants, not limited, but at God's prerogative, God manifests his presence as he initiates this intimate relationship and says, I will make my inhabitants right here with you, Ezekiel, because we've got something to talk about. Before any of that happens, though, we move from the scene to the sights. What is it that this man sees? Look at verse 4. The sights. The first sight that he sees, verse 4. And I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, fire flashing forth continually. In the midst of the fire, it were as if it were gleaming metal. Can you see this in your mind? The wind's blowing, the clouds are blowing, and he sees this cloud coming with brightness all around it, and when he looks within it, he sees the fire flashing from it, and he sees in it the fire as if it's gleaming metal, and it's just traveling closer toward him. And this is the power of God on display. God showing up in such a powerful way that Ezekiel cannot for one moment ignore that someone greater than he has entered into this space. Here, God is defying time and space and matter and just showing up in power and displaying his glory in front of a man who's hopelessly in need for God to show up and do something. That's exactly what God did. That's what God does for us today too. In his blazing, beautiful holiness and awesome power, he shows up. You see the sight of the storm. You see a sight now of the 4 living creatures. I'm not going to reread the entire passage, but here are some lessons very briefly. One, I think when you look at these 4 living creatures, the first lesson is a lesson on the sovereign rule of God over all of creation. The sovereign rule of God over all of creation. When you see them in their faces, verse 10 tells us, the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. And the 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, and the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle. And so what is this? As these 4 cherubim are there, and he looks at them, and they are 4-sided. The front of them, they're looking, and it has the face of a man. But then on the right side is the face of a lion. And then on the left side is the face of an ox. And on the back side is the face of an eagle. There's nowhere that you can go in to escape the viewpoints of this cherubim. It is phenomenal to see. That's why when you see them moving, they move forwards and backwards and side to side, almost in a syncretism together, in this beautiful movement, never needing to turn, for they see from all sides. And with this idea of the creatures, I believe, is a picture of all of creation. The human face, speaking of humanity, God's highest order in creation, man. The right side is the lion. Now, it has been said that this is the highest of the wild animals that God created. On the left side is the ox. This is the highest of the domesticated animals. At the back side of it is the eagle, and that is the highest, the strongest of the flying. So, all of creation, all the creatures are here under the sovereign control of God. The number 4 is constantly repeated for creatures, for wheels. There's this constant idea of 4s that run through this. And this was a way in the Old Testament to speak about rule or dominion. That's why you'd have kings saying things like, I am the king over the 4 corners of Lake Lure. So I wish. So not only is this a lesson on the sovereignty in rule over creation, but also over the 4 corners of the earth. Not just every created being, but every inch of his creation comes under his sovereign rule. Second lesson to be learned is the lesson of God's omniscience. You'll notice that whether it be on these creatures as well as you will see in the wheels, that they have eyes all around them. What are these eyes? I believe, as the majority of the commentators that I have read would speak to, this is a picture of the omniscience of God, that nothing ever escapes his attention, that God knows all things from the beginning to the end. And then if you look down to verse number 12, It says, and each went straight forward. Whenever the Spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. Look, drop your eyes down to verse number 20. You're going to see the same picture, although it's not with the creatures, it has to do with the wheels then. In verse 20, whenever the Spirit wanted to go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them, for the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. A lesson, firstly, with regards to the omniscience, but now also a lesson with regards to God's sovereign control. Wherever the Spirit went, there they went. God controlling whether they would move forward or to the side, backwards, whether they lift up or whether they go down, whatever direction they're doing, here you find God's sovereign control over these cherubim that are under his throne. So now you've got this picture in your mind. You have these four living creatures. They are cherubim. They have four wings. They are covering their bodies with these two wings, and they've got two wings stretched out, and they're touching the tips of one another's wings. Under their arms are the human hands. They're covered with eyes all about. We find four wheels next to each one. This is forming like a chariot. And above them, we're going to see the expanse with a throne. In your mind's eye, you're now starting to see the development of this throne of God, almost as if it's on a chariot, marching in, coming in the wind, through the clouds, entering in to Ezekiel's time. I found it interesting when I saw how they were moving. Verse 15 says, I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel, and so this is the next sight that you're seeing is the four wheels. I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures for each one of the four of them, and as for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl. The four had the same likeness, their appearance and construction being as it were a wheel within a wheel. Almost like there's a unity at hand there. When they went in any of their four directions without turning as they went. Their rooms were tall and awesome, and the rooms of all four were full of eyes all around. When the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them. When the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the Spirit wanted to go, they went. The wheels rose along with them, for these went, and when those stood, they stood. And when they rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them, for the Spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. I hope I'm not stressing or stretching, but I see this beautiful, not chaos taking place. As Ezekiel looks and he sees this, I'm certain he's trying to put into words what he's seeing, and I'm sure this is blowing this guy's mind. What is this? But he's speaking of how these things are moving together. It's almost as if there's no chaos going on here. It's just so indicative of the work of God, a work of order. It's so indicative of the work of God, everything working perfectly together in oneness. It's almost like syncretism, or a synchristic dance. I don't know if any of you watch the Olympics when the ladies do this swimming, and boy, I tell you, it looks like one arm and one leg, and how they keep so, the choreography is just so awesomely in order and right. It's just like a oneness happening. And I can see as Ezekiel's looking, everything's moving. As one goes, the other goes. And as they go, it goes up and they come down, they go left, they go forward, they go backwards. Just everything is so working together. I think there's a lesson to be learned here with regards to the unity and oneness and the way God does things in order. This is not chaos. This is not like the Tasmanian devil. Have any of you seen that cartoon when Taz shows up and And it's like all just a mess, you know. No, nothing like that. God, very precise, very orderly. And he displays his glory in that. So you've seen the sky, you've seen the living creatures, you've seen the wheels. Now the next sight we see is this expanse. You've got your cherubim, you have your wheels, now above them is this expanse. The word that's used here for this expanse in verse 22 says, over the heads of the living creature there was the likeness of an expanse. It was shining like awe-inspiring crystal, spread out above their heads. The same word that's used here is the word that is used in the book of Genesis that speaks about the dividing of the sky and the water. This almost like an atmosphere that is shining and brilliant. And right under it, these wings were stretched out straight, one toward the other, and each creature had two wings covering its body. And this beautiful expanse. Now we go from sight to sounds. Listen to the sound. Verse 24. And when they, speaking of these angels, when they went, they heard the sound of their wings. I heard the sound of their wings like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. When they stood still, they let down their wings. So here they are, almost as if they are underpinning this expanse. And their wings are making this incredible sound. Like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty. And then he says, like the sound of an army. That one really kind of grabs me. I remember when I was served in the military in South Africa, the sounds of men marching and the vehicles pulling in, and just the sound. I remember the one night we were at a place called Rimfasmark. It would be a place where an entire exercise would be held as if it were a live war taking place. I remember the young men grabbing their ears because of the sounds of the tanks firing and the mortars dropping and the guns firing, the shouting and the yelling of the staff who were in charge of this exercise. And it was more than ear-blowing, it was mind-numbing in its sound. And here we have this huge sound that speaks of this Lord of hosts who is now stepping on to the sea. But then, verse 25, and then came a voice from above the expanse over their heads. When they stood still, they let down their wings. I might be reading into this passage, but I hope I'm not. When I read the end of verse 24, it says, the sound of a tumult, like the sound of an army. And when they stood still, they let down their wings. And I wrote a word in here, and it is this: silence. Silence. As their wings are making these noises, and all of a sudden, they bring their wings down. And it goes from mind-blowing sound to dead quiet. Absolutely. And then, it's almost as if there's this build up. He has seen the storm. He's seen the clouds. He's seen the fire. He's seen the lightning. He's seen the four creatures. He's seen the wheels. He's heard the sound. And all of a sudden, everything's quiet. Everything's quiet. Why? Because then came a voice. And it's almost like this crescendo has been reached. And it's time for the Creator God to speak. And I'm like, tell me what's he going to say? But verse 26 then says, not what he says. And I am disappointed because I'm rushing. I want to know, what is it you got to say? And you're going to have to wait till chapter 2 to find out what he says. He's not going to say anything now. I'm like, this is so wrong. From the sound comes the speaking of one. We don't know what he's saying, but it is this. There's a lesson to be learned that this is a personal God who communicates. This is not just some power that is showing up, but this is a personal God who communicates. God speaks. God speaks. This is not some dead idol. He speaks. Our second to final point, we're now introduced to the seating. To the seating. Verse 26. Above the expanse and over their heads there was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like sapphire. And seated above the likeness of this throne was a likeness with a human appearance. And upward from what appeared to be his waist, I saw what it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of a fire enclosed all around. And so he's seeing this figure of a man, and from his waist he is seeing what looks like gleaming metal, all fire around him. And as he drops his eyes down from looking at this body, and you'll notice that there's nothing spoken about his head, just from his waist up, just speaks about what he's seeing, a form. And as he drops his eyes and he looks down a little, it says, and downward from that, the appearance of his waist, I saw that it was the appearance of fire, and there was brightness all around him. So now you have these angels with their wings, these wheels, there's a wheel within a wheel that's turning and moving, an expanse, a throne, and one seated on this throne, and up to his waist is like fire and brightness all around him, and above his waist is like fire and the gleaming metal and brightness and fire around him. And then around him, he says, verse 28, like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud, in other words, a rainbow is in the cloud on the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness all around him. Isn't that awesome? I don't know how, I just wish I could just read this, and I mean, it just, I don't have words to add to what's being explained. Such, he says, was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. You'll notice this throne, the position of exaltation. Above the expanse, over their heads, there was the likeness of a throne. High and exalted. Starting to sound like Isaiah, isn't it? That the throne is high and exalted. It's not among these creatures. It is not below them. It is not next to them. But the throne is above them. And it's almost as if they're underpinning this expanse that the throne is upon. And this throne is high. This position of where God is seated is high above any other. The person that is exalted, he sees the appearance of man. The Christ seated upon his throne. We see this fire that is coming as we see this picture of the gleaming metal. I see the picture of the judgment of God upon His people, but at the same time, the holiness of God that is pure and unlike any other, separated beyond. And He's showing Himself here to be glorious. And then there's that rainbow, the promise, that covenant that was made at the time of the flood. Never again will I destroy the earth by means of a flood. And that rainbow is the beautiful picture of that covenant of grace that God has. Now you come on Sunday, I'm going to speak about how He is going to destroy the earth, but not like that. Position of exaltation, the person worth exalting, His purity in judgment and holiness, and His promise, a covenant-keeping God. Who is this that we've spoken about tonight? This is the one who is transcendent above His creation. He is transcendent above time, matter, and space, but yet He is immanently and personally and presently involved with His people. This is the God who never changes. When He says something, He does it. He is the God who is eternal and absolutely unlimited in His being. And this God is the one who is infinite in His wisdom. He is all-knowing and all-present. And this is the Almighty, who is, who was, and who is to come. This is the one from whom all things come, through all things flow, and to all things belong. And this is a God who is good in His works and in His words and in His ways. This is the God who is merciful and loving. He's kind and gracious. He's compassionate. He's condescending to us. He initiates intimate relationship with us, and He speaks to us. This is a God who speaks and worlds come into being. This is a God who is jealous for His people and will do anything and everything to keep His people. He's righteous in His judgments. He's severe in His wrath. He is a holy God. My note says, remember to say that He is the holy, holy, holy God who is separated and cut above, exalted and unlike any other. He's the superlative God, the one who's without equal, without likeness, a God that has no comparisons, the one who defines any definition, and the one that defines any description of who He truly is. King of kings, a Lord of lords, that's seated on a throne. And He's glorious. Glorious. This is glory on display. This is the sum of His divine attributes on display for Ezekiel to see and for you and me to sit back and say, oh my, what a God we serve. My final point. If you have seen the seating of God like Ezekiel did, then the conclusion means there needs to be a surrender. There is a God and you're not Him. He will not compete for a place on His throne. He demands 100% allegiance. And even when there are those things that compete for our affections, He says, there's no one like me. Oh, that we would become as enamored with Him as we are with all these other things that seem to compete with our affections. That we would seek to see Him as the King, and we would seek to surrender all that we are to him. Look what Ezekiel did. He says, when I saw it, I fell on my face. And then I heard the voice of one speaking. It's just interesting to me. I don't know that there is significance to this, but it's interesting to me. It's only after he fell on his face that he heard the voice of one speaking. Remember, we heard the voice, and then we have all this description of the throne, and then we have him responding, and then only does he hear the voice. There's something to be learned about a surrenderedness to God, that God wants to initiate and has initiated an intimate relationship with each of us. And God is very purposeful in the way that he calls his people. But whenever he does that, he first shows himself to be glorious. We saw that in the life of Isaiah. Isaiah looked up, he saw the Lord high and lifted up. Then we find him, woe is me. And then we find God speaking to him, whom shall we send and who will go for us? Same with Ezekiel. God shows himself to be high and exalted. God shows himself to be so glorious. And we find Ezekiel on his face. And then God is going to speak to him. And God's going to put a call upon this man's life that is undeniable. Take time tonight to read chapter 2. It's awesome. What has God said to you tonight? Is this your God? Or is your God so much smaller than this? How easy it is for us to create a God in our own image. He's just like us. He's got all our limitations. He acts just like us. No. The God that reveals himself as we behold our God upon the throne is glorious, unlike any other. I encourage you tonight, worship him. Surrender all that you are to him. Would you pray with me tonight? Lord, we are grateful for your word. We are so thankful